On this episode of Crowdfunding Nerds, we discuss the US election. We cover tariffs and Chinese manufacturing concerns, domestic concerns, international concerns, political turmoil, and more. Let's jump into it.
Game begin.
Let's go.
I used to be a marketer like you until I took an arrow to the knee.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another awesome episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. I am your host, Andrew Lone, and I'm joined as always by Sean and not Rick. The topic for today is one that's kind of an edgy one that I think I hope you guys find value in this, because I'm kind of stepping out a little bit on a limb to talk about something that really, really matters to your business, which is the US election. Let's talk about how will the election result of Donald Trump and the Republican Party affect crowdfunding and affect the business. So we're not going to be, our aim is not to share our political opinions, but it's to try to actually understand from the perspective of we want to be successful in the crowdfunding industry, and board game industry and publishing and everything. How will this affect us tangibly? And so it's us, this podcast is us just trying to understand and address all of the relevant angles to what could be in the future. So in some ways, it's like we're forecasting, where we do like one episode every year, typically in December, that where we kind of forecast and predict what we think next, will happen next year. I'm sure that this will, be involved in some of our predictions in a future episode. But for now, I want to talk about what impact this is going to have on the people that are bringing products to Kickstarter and GameFound and whatnot, or or just running publishing businesses. And so how do you think of the framing of that topic, Sean?
Yeah, I think it's a good setup. Maybe one thing to sort of caveat this discussion, we're probably going to be doing a lot of speculation, but whether our speculations are founded or not, these things are still worth thinking about and trying to prepare for, at least have some type of response to. So hopefully, if nothing else, this will just give you some perspectives to think about in terms of how this potentially could impact your business.
Yeah.
What are some of the safeguards you might want to prepare for, and how can you maybe even leverage some of the opportunities that could come in the future?
Yes. And so, one thing that I actually would really like to start with is the US election it impacts the entire world. The eyes of the world were on the United States during the election time. It has an effect on the rest of the world. All policies in Western nations, even places like China and, in the Far East, and they all have their eyes on the US election. And so whatever happens in the US, it so impacts the rest of the world. But the first thing I want to say is, if you felt invested in this election and you have never yet gone to Kickstarter before, or crowdfunding of any kind, right? Or maybe if you've done small projects but you have like the big project you're working on, the feeling that I had on the eve of the election or the day before, where it's like, I don't know how it's going to go. I hope that, my side wins and this and that, but I don't know how it's going to go. I'm going to prepare for every contingency, and just, this is what I'll do in this case, this is what I'll do in that case. Either way, I'm going to be okay. Either way, I'm going to get up in the morning and go to work and, love my family and try to be a positive force in my community and that kind of thing. That feeling is the exact feeling that I had the day before launching my latest Kickstarter. It was so funny how similar those feelings are. The feeling of uncertainty, the hope that things will go well, but planning for every contingency. What if things don't go well? And I'm not exactly thinking like, well, what if I just barely fund, or what if I fund, on the first day, or what if I don't fund at all, or, those types of questions. And, are things that go through your head when you're about to launch a Kickstarter campaign. And so the feeling that you had on the eve of the election, if you we're paying attention to it, is the feeling that you is very quite similar to the feeling that you will have when you launch your own crowdfunding campaign. So I
Yeah,
just
but I'm
found that
sure
to
it
be
probably hits a bit more home if you're a US citizen. Um, I don't know.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I probably it's as a U.S. citizen, I agree. So, and it's good that you're not a U.S. citizen. You're in the UK, and so it'll be really great to get your perspective on what it looked like from your side, and with your people, right? So, so any for initial thoughts you want to talk about? Maybe we could, before we get into everything, we could talk about what we want, like the topics we want to address, which I think people will want to know. But first, is there any comment that you have before we dive in?
Well, I did watch the Joe Rogan podcast with Donald Trump, so I'm somewhat familiar with that. I know you have as well, so that might be impacting some of our discussions,
Yeah.
some of the things you brought up there. In terms of following US politics, to be honest, I don't follow it too closely. So I might not be the most informed person to speak in some of these matters. But
Mhm.
I've got thoughts of um, other areas that might be useful. So we'll just see how it
Yeah.
goes.
Yeah, yeah. So now one of the things that I think is very important, so that there are four major areas that we wanted to discuss. The first one would be tariffs and Chinese manufacturing concerns. We want to talk about domestic concerns that would be within the United States, concerns with for people in the U.S., international concerns, so people that are not inside the U.S., and political turmoil, generally how this impacts the world, how it affects generally how how the result affects crowdfunding, how this will impact you, and how your decisions during this time will help you be more successful or less successful. So hopefully this will be an edifying podcast. And certainly the goal is not to be politically divisive, but to take an intelligent approach on something that really impacts all of us. There's nothing more impactful as a general rule than I mean, well, there are very few things more impactful than a U.S. presidential election, and this election in particular, people were quite opinionated, and so
Well,
here
here
we
in the
go.
UK, we have the best prime ministers money could buy.
Yeah, so I guess the same could be said of all politicians. Um, so okay, so let's get into one of the big things that Donald Trump said he wanted to do is he wanted the US's primary income source to be tariffs, and he wanted to get rid of income tax. So we'll talk about that, but then in particular, the very first area that I'd like to focus on is concerns about manufacturing in China, and if that is going to be, let's say if the US throws a big tariff on any items coming from China, Donald Trump's focus is he wants manufacturing to be brought back to the United States, and that was his concern last time he was elected as well. So one of the nice things about this situation is that we're not all wondering what's going to happen, kind of like the analogy I use all the time, probably too often at this point, the blind men touching the elephant. um I feel that we are not that way, because we actually have stuff to look back upon and say, well, what did he do last time? How did it work out last time? And China was a big focus of his last of the administration between whatever 2017 to 2021, or whatever it was, the 2016 to 2020. um and so there was actually some things that happened there. So what do you remember about that time, Sean? Were you paying close attention? I remember.
To what's happening in the US.
Well, so okay, I'll just jump into what I remember, because I went to Kickstarter in 2021 with our very first product, Deliverance, and so I remember clearly the concern that I had in regard to Chinese manufacturing at the time. Donald Trump said, "China, you need to play ball. You are taxing us for things, and they have tariffs for U.S. goods, and they straight up wouldn't buy certain things, like they wouldn't buy U.S. steel or other things like that, and they would tariff. They had tariffs that were very high, and the US had tariffs that were very low. So Donald Trump said, we're going to increase our tariffs on your goods in 4 phases. And the first phase is like things that would I think that it was broken out in the 4 phases that were set at like this. These tariffs will go into effect on this date if you don't play ball, and then these, phase 2 tariffs will go into effect on that date if you don't play ball. And what I mean by playing ball is China had to lower their tariffs on our goods, or they had to actually commit to purchasing a certain amount of goods or whatever. So that's one of the things that Donald Trump did. Board games, actually toys and games, were in the final phase. They were placed into the final phase. So toys and games, and the way that I kind of saw it at the time, I remember saying, or the businesses in phase 1, the U.S. businesses would be the least damaged that were involved in phase 1. If you go all the way to phase 4, the businesses that would be impacted by tariffs in phase 4 would be the businesses that would be the most damaged that are in the US, because, for example, the toy industry and games industry, the majority of products manufactured there come from China, because China has the best equipment, the cheapest labor, all of that. They're very well set up for it, and which I think was kind of by design at the end of World War II, right?
Yes,
Is
well,
that
it was under Henry Kissinger. He really made inroads for the US and the East, the transfer of US technology, even financing to the Soviet bloc, but also to communist China, and built it up what it is today. And it now
Mhm.
is really just the extended arm of the US
Yep,
industrial complex in terms of manufacturing. That's what it is. It's just sort of the off world.
yep. So, um, that's something that I think is going to stay that way. You're not going to have a US factory that jumps in and is like, we are setting ourselves up to take over all the Chinese business. We'll do miniature molding, and we'll do all that stuff. I mean, plastic in general, if you want something made of plastic, you have to get it in China. So,
Yeah, and
or
I
it's going
imagine
to
if someone did try to create some competition, they would suddenly have a heart attack, or maybe decide to end themselves. I think there's too much financial investments abroad at this point to bring it back to the US.
well, I hope not, but I mean, you have been reading all those CIA books, so you know more about that than I do. Um, so yeah, I think that the the summation of this point, that the way that I feel about this, and the prediction that I will make, is that board games will continue to be made in China. That tariffs, if they are placed on board games, are not going to be very high. Um, the main concern that I would have would be like if income tax was removed, and then meaningfully sized tariffs were placed on Chinese goods. I can tell you, as a board game manufacturer or a board game publisher, if my game went from, let's just say, $10 unit cost, if I had a 20% tariff on that, so it was $12, I am passing that cost on to the end consumer. So although there is no income tax, if you will, the cost of goods will rise. So that's going to be a concern. I don't think that, well, I guess it would be a benefit because, I don't know, 15% of the money that we have to pay to the government is removed. But then, I'm going to have to pay that roughly that same amount in the increased cost of goods. Um,
Mhm.
so
That's why I thought it was a bit of a bait and switch, and politicians are very good at sort of telling people what they want to hear, and that's what I noticed with the Joe Rogan podcast. Because one of Trump's criticisms of Kamala was that she was going to raise taxes, but then he just talked about tariffs, which is another way to say
yeah,
taxes. So
yeah,
it's a great way to kind of make your opponent look worse, but then you're sort of doing the same thing. But
yeah.
that's the game they play at that level.
Right. So part of trying to understand politics and politicians is understanding, like reading between the lines and trying to see what they're really saying, and again, for me, what happened last time. So the first thing is, Sean, you talked about income tax. Income tax, we didn't always have income tax. Can you explain where that came from?
As far as I recollect, it's been a while since I looked into it, but I believe it was either the First World War or the Second World War was introduced to pay for the war, and then when the war ended, they kept it on. So uh, you probably just have to look
Jerks.
into that. But that certainly is the case. I know that the U.S. at one time had a temporary income tax for the Civil War, but that was dropped. But when I know one of the world wars came, they're like, "No, we like this.
Yeah.
let's just keep this going." But I know we actually discussed this in a staff meeting recently because I think the thing that kind of the idea of taxes and uh, raising them or the state of the economy,
Mhm.
it's all based upon an economic system, the US dollar, that is insolvent.
Mhm.
The US
Mhm.
dollar is going to crash, it's going to fail. It's been completely
Yep.
removed from any type of basis in reality. I think
Right.
after 2020, banks could literally create money from nothing now. You used to have a fraction of
Mhm.
something to make money from, and back in the 60s it was connected to the gold standard, but it's completely been removed from reality. So
Right.
it's just a matter of time before the economy completely crashes. We have hyperinflation, or
Yep.
just the US dollar results to nothing.
Yep.
So I think we have to kind of keep that all in mind, that the taxation system is sort of built upon a
Mhm.
very shaky foundation of the
Yeah.
current economic system.
And I definitely want to get to that actually. That in my listing for domestic concerns, I wanted to talk about um, that in particular. I don't want to give it away too early, but I have an opinion on that. So keep that in mind. Um, so I would say, just based on the income tax, um, I don't think they're getting rid of the income tax. I just don't think they're going to do that. Politicians like money, and they like getting money. They like getting more money. So I could foresee tariffs coming into play in some way on very specific products. Um, and I do think that concessions were made last time for board games. They actually were not impacted at all because they were part of toys and games, which was in that final phase. So we were never impacted by tariffs. Now, we did have creators that freaked out, that were like, "Oh, I don't want to make my game right now," and we had, at the time, the largest tabletop crowdfunding campaign, Frosthaven, was in 2020, I think, and that was because there were a lot of people, because of COVID and fear about the tariffs on games and whatnot. A lot of creators stopped. They did not move forward with their plans to sell stuff. And I remember at that time, whenever creators get scared, you should put money into marketing, because dude, it's like, it can be ridiculous. Like, do the opposite, because
It's like stocks.
yeah, it's really strange, because I can say, like, at that time, the coronavirus was very scary in the beginning of 2020, right? And that was causing creators to not go to Kickstarter with their product. And there were a lot of people that were used to spending money on Kickstarter that were just spending the same amount of money on fewer products. And so, Frosthaven, I think, was one of the major beneficiaries of that. But even aside from that, I remember all of my ad campaigns. I think I was solo running Crowdfunding Nerds at the time. I hadn't even yet branded it Crowdfunding Nerds. And that was on the board game marketing side. I um I was getting the cheapest clicks on Facebook that I've ever gotten, and the best, conversion rates for email, for clicks to emails and everything like that. It's definitely something, and I know that there are going to be some people that listen to this that think like, oh, that's a crazy move to actually um, continue forward with my marketing plans, but just test me when, if ever anybody gets scared, and you start hearing like, oh, maybe you should delay a few months or whatever, just put $20 a day into Facebook ads and see how cheap your clicks are. Because if the small people that target board gamers start pulling their funding, because of, people for hype or whatever, they start doing stuff like that. That is, there are going to be a lot of people on social media, and there are not enough ads to go around. So you're going to get really cheap clicks. So don't miss out on that opportunity, and don't succumb to fear. I think one of the, you're talking about stock markets and whatnot. one of the most common things that people do is when the market crashes, they sell all their stuff and then they sold it at a massive loss. And so when the market recovers, they don't benefit from that recovery.
Hmm.
They only suffered from the loss because they sold it at the very bottom or they sold it on the way down. And so we're in here for the long term. We're not in here for like a one and done crowdfunding project. Hopefully people listening to this are planning on being around longer or being around to support their games and whatnot. So just kind of keep that in mind. We can move on to domestic concerns now. Any final thoughts on tariffs or Chinese manufacturing concerns?
We may just come back to income tax. That hypothetically speaking, if income tax was to be removed, there are other ways to still tax people. So it can be like, oh, we removed income tax, but we increased taxes somewhere else. So it
Mhm.
appears that the
Yeah.
taxes, and so it's a good kind of PR move to kind of make people like, yay, income tax has been removed. But they could just print more money. As I said,
Right.
they've kind of removed the US dollar
Mhm.
from anything in reality. So they can just print more money. That's a
Yes.
way to tax people by sort of like a hidden tax.
Yeah.
There's a great book called The Creature of Jekyll Isle that kind of goes through the banking history of the US, but particularly this idea of inflation being a hidden tax
Mhm.
that is a way to kind of increase taxes
Mhm.
covertly without people realizing. Just over time, your spending power is reduced, and therefore you've kind of been taxed.
Yep. So let's move into domestic concerns because this actually, so the um, one of the common bits of concern that Americans have about the economy and frankly, international markets have about the US dollar is that, we're not only about inflation, but it's actually about the value of the US dollar and the debt, the US debt. So last term that Donald Trump ran, the US debt increased pretty substantially. I would actually, as I look back, I think that happened because of COVID. Um, and then also, that they printed lots of money and whatnot during that time. But the debt, I mean, every day that our country is closed, we lose like $1 trillion or something like that. And we were closed. We had a 15 days to flatten the curve that extended like 2.5 years in some places. That was horrible for the economy. And um, so the debt increased. I can't really say that I think that that's tied to any specific policy. I actually think that that's tied to shutting down the country and, that during COVID when we all thought it was the last plague of, the 10 plagues of Egypt or whatever. So it's something that I think we're in this situation now and we have a very large debt where it's like the yearly interest is in the am I crazy? It's in the trillions of dollars now? It's like
Yeah,
$3
I
trillion
think
dollars a year or something
yeah
like that.
the sort of the you know domestic GDP can't pay off the interest payments at this
Mhm.
point. So it's just it's just spiraling downhill. it's just,
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
there's no sort of recovering of this economic system. There's going to be a new one popping up.
Right. So, and I kind of agree, and I think that's actually where cryptocurrency is coming in. Cashless society is where you know. But I believe okay. So, interest payments will total $892 billion in fiscal year 2024, and they will likely rise. Right. So because it's not like we're deficit spending. We're spending money we don't have, and what we're doing is we're actually printing money to send to people to pay off debt. But at a certain point, when you print enough money, you devalue your currency enough that it's not worth the paper it's printed on, right? So the concern is how like where that's one serious domestic concern that I think everybody would have. So let's talk about that. First thing that you can do to counter that problem is you can stop spending in a deficit. So you could stop spending so much money that you don't have. Stop funding wars. That's actually something that Donald Trump did. He didn't. He actually was like the first president in my lifetime that I was paying attention to that started no new wars. Um, but and he's kind of pledged to stop wars, and I actually believe him that it will be his goal to stop wars. He's actually a little bit like in some ways a little psychotically obsessed with stopping wars last time, like North Korea. getting all mad, and then Israel and the Palestinians, and trying to broker peace between them, and that was like an obsession of his that he had. Just it was very interesting, but I actually believe that he will work to stop wars, and will that means that the U.S. will not have to pay for as many wars if we are not involved in those things. I don't think that all wars will stop. I think, for example, Ukraine or whatever, like if it's related to allies or U.S. security in the region or whatever, I don't think it's just going to be as easy as. I mean, we saw kind of how disastrous it could be when you just irrationally pull everything out of the Middle East, and that was very bad for us, right? But that was done quickly and hastily. I don't think that things will be done hastily. I don't think that we'll drop Ukraine from as an ally to so that we don't have to pay them any more money or something like that. But I do think that we'll work toward the other option. So you can pay down your liability, so that you don't have as much money that you're paying interest on, and that's one way to lower the national debt and to kind of survive on with the U.S. dollar. The second way, and I think actually this is the way that we're going to get more of this. This is the way I think that it's going to work. We're going to increase our assets. So if you want to pay down a debt, that's one way to deal with this this crazy the economic issues that we're talking about. Second way is to increase your assets so that your debt, even though you're having to pay more, you've got more money for which more value that you can so in a way. So like in particular, I'm actually getting at oil. So the U.S. is one of the has some of I think it has the largest untapped oil reserves in of any country in the world, and and Donald Trump is famous for saying drill baby drill. Like he wants to drill the oil, um, and with the fact that you've got the presidency, the House, and the Senate, which all at this time of this recording look like they're all Republican, I think that he's going to be able to deregulate and enable those people to drill in places and whatnot. Regardless of how you feel about drilling, and it's bad for the environment and all, but that I believe is what's going to happen. So um, I think that the assets that the US develops from that are going to stave off any type of currency collapse, because, and eventually we're going to need some sort of, method to increase the assets that we have. And that's probably the number one asset. China has precious metals, like rare earth metals, they call them. That's where most of the world's rare earth metals come from. And, the US doesn't have epic supplies of rare earth metals. What the US has is oil. So during Donald Trump's administration, the US became energy independent. So they actually were drilling enough that the US supply of oil was able to be entirely, found from the US, right? And so, or entirely found from within the US. We didn't have to import any oil from Saudi Arabia or whatever. That causes the assets of the US to increase because we have access to all of that oil. And I think that that is the primary way that we're going to avoid currency collapse and, inflation and, all of that. So I actually think that for, I don't know, I wouldn't call it the short term, but I would say for a decent amount of time, certainly, at least the next 4 years of the presidency, you're going to have what looks like a booming economy and that kind of thing, because the oil is going to be going to increase our assets. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, and I could probably offer a third option, which is to try the international banking cartel who created this mess for high treason, and then create a new economic paradigm, and then all the debt's gone. So you
You should be president.
You created a Ponzi scheme, and you're getting us to all pay the bill, but it's your problem.
Yep.
You created this problem, so
Mhm.
yeah. But
Yeah,
I think something to keep in mind as well is that if you have this idea that the US dollar is collapsing, some would say by design, the thing to keep an eye on is central bank digital currencies, which seems to be the worst idea that anyone could think of. It's like the
Yeah.
most dystopian thing you could ever come across. It's sort of the amalgamation of the worst parts of fiat and then the worst parts of cryptocurrency. Let's put those two things together. So yeah, that's I think there might be
Yeah.
a push towards something like that, and that's not going to be fun. But we'll
Yeah.
see. We don't
You
know.
know, Bitcoin, which is don't invest in Bitcoin in my opinion, but I don't know everything about it. But when Donald Trump was announced as the president, Bitcoin shot from like 69,000 to right now, what is it, $76,000 a Bitcoin. It increased by like 10% just since that happened. And I know the stock market has risen to an all-time high, and that kind of thing. And I think that the market is reacting with the news that hopefully things will improve economically with the switching of administrations. And it's very common that that happens when one administration suffers economically. Usually it switches from Democrat to Republican or from Republican to Democrat. You typically have a changing of the guard. If the economy is doing poorly, everybody is personally impacted with their wallets and like, well, we don't like these people, let's see if the other people can do better. And which was my prediction. It was, I didn't bet on it. I guess I should have. Evidently, people made money on that, but that Donald Trump would win because of the economy. That's what I thought. Um,
I do think that
so
the economy kind of swings up and down, and I think it's to sort of temporarily satiate people. It's like,
yeah,
oh, it's not that bad, but I think foundationally the entire system is going to fail. So you got to
yeah,
kind of keep that in mind. It might temporarily do better for a little while because there might be some trick to kind of
mhm,
make it stabilize. But I think
right.
any business person needs to sort of think with in terms of the idea that the US dollar will eventually fail at some point, and what is the alternative? What is the solution
Mhm.
at that?
And how to, in a lot of ways, how do you future proof yourself from that? Which
Yes,
is really its own
go into the
podcast.
woods and you buy
Buy a
rifles
cabin.
and you stock up.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
bunker
buy a
down.
cabin when while your money is worth something, you buy a cabin and yeah, you just ride it out, Um pee in a cup and drink that and or
But in all seriousness, I that's one reason why I have taken some of my uh, capital and taken it out of the kind of standard economic system for this very reason. If there is a collapse, I don't want everything and all my eggs in one basket. You want to
Mhm.
diversify your assets if you can. So
Right.
I have put some of my savings into Monero, which I think is the most powerful cryptocurrency, probably the only legitimate usable cryptocurrency that there is. There's lots of problems with Bitcoin. I recommend a book by Roger Ver called Hijacking Bitcoin. It just highlights a lot of problems with Bitcoin as it stands today. But I
Yeah.
do think it's worthwhile for people to think of if you have resources, maybe diversifying it slightly, maybe putting some in gold
Mhm.
or investing some in property or things which can't, just go up in smoke
Right.
one day. Money really has no real world value apart from the trust that we all share in terms of
Yep.
accepting and using it. So,
I think that's also why education is very valuable. My
mhm,
parents told me that, this actually really stuck with me is that, even no matter what happens, if your country collapses and you're taken over in a war or whatever, if you are educated, nobody can take the what you have learned away from you. So that is something that you get to carry with you all the time. And while I didn't think I was going to be uh, a slave, anybody's slave in my lifetime or anything like that, I thought that there's a lot of sense in that. So things like property and whatnot are valuable. That's the reason a lot of people are moving to very affordable places that are low cost, for houses
mhm,
and things. It'd be nice to own a house in San Diego, but you can at this point really you have to be wealthy or you have to already be in the housing market in order
mhm,
to afford something like that. And so, that's actually something that I wanted to talk about later in regard to, what people will spend their money on and whatnot. But before that, back to oil. I think because we drill oil, there's going to be a cheaper cost of fuel. I think the cost of fuel is, I've learned actually, one of the primary drivers of the cost of things like groceries. Um, It's pretty wild, because everything is on trucks. Like we literally survive as in the US. If we stopped commerce, the dollar would collapse. Like the only reason that the world economy continues to function is because money continues to trade hands. So because we the currency continues to exchange, and it continues to circulate, which is a high concept that we don't need to expand on. But so the idea is trucks are carrying the majority of products from one place to another in the US. They are all powered by diesel fuel. And if the cost of diesel fuel goes down, as a result, the cost of eggs, milk, meat, and other types of products go down. So, because everything is built in transportation, and actually, this is something that my backers, as as a publisher, would be the beneficiary of, immediate beneficiary, because the idea is that if I'm estimating shipping costs, and if shipping costs less, then I'm going to charge less. So this is one of those things that I have to charge whatever. If a container costs $9,000 per container to bring stuff to the US, then I'm going to have to divide. Let's say if I have only, I don't know, 4,500 games, then or let's just say I have 3,000 games that can go in a container. If that container is $9,000, that's $3 a game that I'm going to charge in regard to shipping, or I'm going to build that in somehow. But if that same container is only $6,000, I'm going to only have to charge $2. I'm not, as a publisher, I'm not going to charge you $3, even though I only had to charge two. I could do that right now and just, containers cost $3. Well, I'm going to charge five. And, you can put your price at anything you want, but I think that the demand is
Hmm.
going to, you're going to suffer eventually. So you want to get your numbers right. You don't want to just charge the most money you can. So a lot of these, especially small business owners, are going to charge what we have to charge based on, in regard to shipping and that kind of thing. We're not trying to make money on it. It's not like eBay where you pay $60 for an item and then you have $60 shipping that you didn't see, like some tool is trying to make money off of you, off your shipping. But no, it's actually, shipping is oftentimes subsidized because people don't want to pay a lot of money in shipping. And that's just the way the market works. And so that cost will be, it will not be passed on, or that cost savings, I'm sorry, will pass on to the consumer, and generally be a good thing. And I think that will cause the overall level of disposable income that people have to increase. And I think that because people, eggs aren't $8 or whatever, you've got lesser prices for common things that people need to buy, groceries and whatnot. People will have a little more disposable income, and they will upgrade the quality of things that they buy as a result. I think also in the same conversation, you have the big things we talked about, like houses, property, new cars, things like that. Those I think are going to continue to remain not very affordable. Um, and because they're not very affordable, people that are not already in the housing market, that didn't, I bought my house in I bought my first house in 2009 during the height of the biggest section of the crash. And then I had my other house in 2013. I sold my house in 2012. It was a little condo, and then we actually bought our house in 2013. And then when I sold that in 2021, yeah, I want to say 2021, it more than doubled in value. It was like invisible money. There's no way in
Hmm.
heck I could afford to buy a house if I didn't already have a house, because the money was like, evidently the money inside the walls was just really, really increased. And, I benefited from the groundswell. But if you didn't have a house, then you're so priced out of houses right now. So I think that a lot of people are going to just say, I'm never going to be able to afford a house. I'm going to continue paying rent, and I'm going to try to buy nice things, that I can enjoy. So, things, they'll have like a used car, or maybe they'll lease a new car. Maybe they'll certainly lease, or rent, right? And they're going to buy nice games. So I actually don't
Hmm.
think that the market, I think the market looks good even for expensive games. um so, which we can talk about, but that's kind of all the, I mean, I guess we could talk about news and social media in regard to domestic. concerns. That's really kind of international and domestic,
Hmm.
news and social media and what you do with them. But anything else you wanted to share
Yeah,
along
well,
those
I
lines?
agree with your overall thesis in terms of people not being able to maybe afford a house, but still buying games for the very reasons you put forth. One thing to think about in terms of oil, as you mentioned, is that oil is a lot bigger than I think just even transport. Big oil sort of touches so many industries in ways you wouldn't even think of intentionally,
Plastic.
like big food, right? Like most of your food is packaged in some type of
Mhm.
oil product, like plastic,
Yep.
pharmaceuticals as well. So there's a really great documentary of how and why big oil conquered the world by
Mhm.
James Corbett. That's a really good documentary. It's the history of sort of the Rockefellers and how they kind of came about and how they kind of took over a lot of industries.
Mhm.
So it is fascinating how oil impacts a lot of different industries. So if the US does start tapping into oil, it might have a lot of sort of unnoticeable or unforeseen impacts on other industries, which you wouldn't necessarily think was obvious because of that one trajectory.
Yeah.
Another thing about you talked about education being really important. Um, if I could kind of sideline, I think you're 100% correct. Education is great. Um, I think this is one reason why I love cryptocurrency as well. Is for example, like something like Monero, all you have to do is remember a 16-word seed phrase, and you can cross a border and carry all your wealth with you. You know, if
Mhm.
you were exceptionally wealthy, you could literally carry millions across a border. No one would know because it's all up here
Mhm.
in your mind. All you do is remember 16 words. John McAfee talked about this, and he was quite a proponent of Monero before he passed. Um, but that being said, we have a, crowdfunding nerds course that we do want to talk about at some point. But I just want to highlight that educating yourself. I thought that was a good segue. Educating yourself is really important, and we try and make that as accessible for you folks as possible. And
Yeah.
our course really does a deep dive into crowdfunding.
Yeah, actually, this podcast, the purpose of this podcast is to educate. We know that there are a lot of people that either can't afford our services, and this is actually why it came about, is because there were a lot of people that had passion projects that couldn't afford our services, or that just needed a bit of advice, and that's why we created the podcast, so we'd have something for free. But then our courses we created, which are like the most concentrated. At this point, we have we have over 200 podcasts, and so listening to all of them to learn, for example, how to do Facebook ads properly, that's a lot of work. But we have a course, our Facebook ads course, which is a highly concentrated dose of exactly what works with firsthand case studies and all of that, that we actually have available for sale right now. But we wanted to expand our course,
Da,
which
da, da.
yeah, you're definitely going to hear more about that down the road. But we do have plans to offer additional courses in addition to boosting up. So anybody who has already bought our course, it has a lifetime of free updates to that course. So like the Facebook ads course, when we make updates and tweaks to it, you will be the beneficiary of that. We've already, we've added additional videos and whatnot that are kind of bonuses that relate to, things adjacent to running Facebook ads. So anyway, if you are curious about how to run Facebook ads, if you intend to do that on your own, get the Crowdfunding Nerds course on Facebook ads. It is the best way to do that. So but yeah, so let's get back into both domestic and international concerns. So we're kind of moving into international concerns, but I think one thing that impacts all of us equally, just as regular everyday humans, are news and social media. News and social media, which sometimes can be quite the same, um, can have such a dramatic effect. In fact, they can make us psychotically angry.
Mhm.
They can bring us into a raging froth at a group of people we've never met. And oftentimes right now, you see there are people that are very very angry with Trump supporters because he's elected, and they're like, how could you do this? Don't you know all of these evil things that are planned? And then, there are people on the other side of the fence that say the same. And it's really, I think social media in particular, as well as news, they profit from getting you angry. And
Mhm.
in many ways, they profit from hiding and concealing, or maybe telling half truths. I'll say, instead of hiding the truth and concealing the truth, they'll tell a half truth. And It's like what the devil did in the Garden of Eden. It's like the worst is the person who will tell you half of the truth and just leave out the important thing, or leave out the other thing, or whatever. Anyway, so what do you have to say about news and social media in regard to keeping our topic in mind, how this election result will affect crowdfunding, how it will impact our listeners and their businesses and their crowdfunding exploits. What do you have to say about news and social media?
Well, I certainly think both of those sources of mediums are really designed to shape people's perceptions. And I think sometimes the unfortunate result is that it can create a perception of reality which doesn't really exist. And I think this really does by stirring up differences and making people quite angry with one another, as you've said. I think most people just are probably quite similar in their goals and desires. They just want to, have a family, work, be able to pay bills, enjoy some leisure time, which most people will unite on.
Mhm,
But there seems to be these other things that they can be quite divisive and
mhm,
tear people apart. As you said, there's probably a financial reason to do that, and who knows what else.
mhm.
Going back to my my CIA books that I read,
Sean,
I
if I disappear one day, it's your fault.
yeah.
So,
But in terms of propaganda, the CIA employ three types of propaganda. I thought this was interesting. It's a book I read called The Cult of Intelligence, written in the 70s, quite interesting. And there's three types of propaganda. There's white propaganda. This is where you say things which are true. So it could be something against your opponent. They say against you don't like Trump. You could actually say things which are true, which are designed to sort of hurt his image.
mhm, right.
But it's called white propaganda. The next one is gray propaganda. And this is where you sort of mix truth with half truths or truth with lies, and they're intentional lies. And the benefit of gray propaganda is that it can actually create a sense of authority with a
Mhm,
certain person or organization, because they are telling you things which are legitimately true, but there's some things in there speckled which are not
mhm,
true. This could also be known as like a limited hangout, where some information is revealed, but they keep some back intentionally, so you come to the wrong conclusion. And then there's black propaganda, which is flat out lies. This is literally lies designed to
mhm,
completely make stuff up. And so I
mhm,
thought that was interesting. If you think in terms of propaganda as having three sort of characteristics,
mhm.
that I think will help you spot deception
Yeah.
when you are engaging with the news or when you are engaging with social media. Just keep those things in mind.
Yeah. One other thing that I want to bring up in regard to concepts, the concept of congruency is a big problem. And it's also the way that human brains work. Which is it's kind of like maybe at the fall of man this happened to us. I'm not sure, but there came a time where people only wanted to hear what they agreed with. So it's very easy for a person like myself or you or any listener to absorb information about things they agree with. So I'll remember memes that support my political ideology or my faith or whatever. Like my favorite thing, if we're talking about like, me as a Christian and remembering a meme, when somebody tells me, oh, the word Trinity isn't even in the Bible, or the word rapture isn't even in the Bible, I think like the Yu-Gi-Oh meme where it's like, you triggered my trap card, and then the trap card says giraffes on it. It's like giraffes aren't even mentioned in the Bible. So they must not exist either. Anyway, it's just really silly. But most people listen to this podcast might not even have any clue about why that's funny, or whatever. But it's something that I already agree with, and so it's easy for me to remember. Now, I don't really have a very good memory of memes for, let's say, atheism, because I am not an atheist, right? So, in the same way, politically, when you are fed news about a side that you like, then you are much more likely to remember it, as well as maintain the good. Like, you chew on the meat, spit out the bones. It's very easy to ingest that information, or filter bad news about your side and not remember it, and actually not commit it to memory. So, if, for example, Donald Trump does something bad, it's very easy for somebody who likes Trump to just hear it, and it goes in one ear and out the other, and they don't retain it because that's not what is congruent with their opinion of the world around them, right? And so it's very dangerous. And then, of course, you can mirror this to a Trump supporter, a Kamala supporter, or whatever. These or anything else for that matter, like things that people agree with. Like, for example, most people listening to this podcast will agree that board games are awesome. So if a double blind case study came out saying board games are bad for your health, we would probably not commit that to memory. We would, however, commit that a double blind case study that says board games make you smarter and more sexy and more awesome. That would be an easy one that I can remember, and because I agree with it. I feel way sexier.
We should create an article with that title.
Anyway, I think that type of thing is very much a key to remember when you're digesting information on social media, and that is why I believe it is very important, especially right now during this election season, when you see somebody upset about the result or happy about the result. Do not unfriend that person. Understand that person. Well, first of all, that person is expressing themselves, and it's better to try to understand why they think the way they think. I try to do this all the time because I want to know arguments better than my opponents know them. I want to know about something, about both sides of a topic, so that I can argue better from my side. I think that it's just a good it's important to understand the valid points of the other side so that you can reason through the legitimate arguments there and say, why is this correct, or where do we agree? And so I just think that will help you to be a sharper. It'll sharpen you. And so I think that a mistake, and this is actually, that was just kind of general advice. That one's free for everyone listening. But and again, my opinion, but I also think it's backed up by data and logic. But then how will this impact you? This is really where your decisions help you to be more or less successful. We had a recent situation where one of our clients had I'll just be very, very generic, but like they had a situation where they had tons of negative reviews because a designer went online and just posted something inflammatory and inspired lots and lots of people to give their game lots of negative reviews on Board Game Geek. That is something that it would have been so much better if that designer never said anything. But because they posted on social media, it got out of control. And I think that what you post on social media is going to help you be either more or less successful. If you post something that is like very pro one side and very against another, you have to be prepared that others won't appreciate that. And I always go back to Michael Jordan, and they'll react with their wallets. I always go back to Michael Jordan and how he was asked one time. Michael Jordan was really the best basketball player of all time, better than Kobe in my very uneducated opinion, better than LeBron. I feel like Michael Jordan just was incredible. In fact, he paved a way for all these other athletes to be awesome. And he was the one that I think it's a movie called Air, really great movie. I really enjoyed it, but it's about the Air Jordan and how
Spaceballs?
no, it was
Space Jam.
Spaceballs. Space Jam. No. I'm talking about a movie called Air.
Spaceballs would be a cool film.
Yes. Well, it was a cool film. It was a Mel Brooks film. It was like making fun of Star Wars.
Oh,
So,
really? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was one of my favorites.
That's probably how I confused it. I was just thinking of like space basketballs.
Got it. So Michael Jordan was the first to ever have a percent ownership of his shoe, or percent revenue of his shoe, and he sold, he sold like billions of dollars of Air Jordans. It's probably one of the best, I don't know. It's just a really incredible success story. But he was asked one time, why don't you get more political? Because he had lots and lots of influence, and he said that because Republicans spend money too, and that it told you, okay, he's a Democrat, and he is not vocal about his political beliefs because he would rather make money than divide his consumer base. there are consumers that are, I mean, we work with all sorts of people. Like we work with all sorts of people that are very you know, Republican and Democrat. That's probably, those terms are probably very US terms, or what we could say like very liberal or very conservative, very progressive, very you know, traditional. And they both have goals, dreams, and projects, and I think that they're, you know, they're both, that are both worthy of support. But if I were to go on social media and say something about how, you know, you know, whatever political comment, it's kind of in a way shooting myself in the foot if people cared about what I had to say. Because then I'm saying, hey, everyone, I want to divide over politics, and I want only the people on the side of politics I agree with to hire me, because that's kind of what would happen. And so as a result, you can negatively impact your the sale of your products with your opinions. And so as a business owner, you need to consider that. And you know, if an
I think
idiot would
another
do it,
thing
just don't.
another thing is I think social media gives people a sense of entitlement. I I think the assumption is that you think people actually want to hear or care about your political opinions.
Yeah.
And we kind of see this with like tone deaf, you know, celebrities like actors telling people what to do. And at the end of the day, they're just
Mhm.
sort of glorified entertainers. They glorify clowns
Right.
essentially. And no one really cares to hear their opinions about these
Mhm.
things unless
Yeah.
someone asks for them. But usually no one's asking to hear about so and so's opinion on such an issue. So that's also something to keep in mind is that, you know, these things might be best left for one-on-one conversations where you
Mhm.
actually have meaningful communications with people who do care about your views and are trying to have some type of consensus or about these ideas. I don't think social media or in general online it's a particularly useful way to
Mhm.
communicate controversial ideas.
Yeah, I think, social media breeds insanity,
Yes,
especially TikTok and X, uh,
yes.
beyond most other things.
If you read an X post, but if you keep in mind, if this person was tied up in a straitjacket in a psych ward, would they say these things? I conclude yes, because it just seems like a ramblings of crazy people. It's
Yeah.
like, well, this is what crazy people would say.
It's like, "Oh, that's what your inner monologue is saying."
Yeah.
I don't like it, you know? I feel like people get into so much trouble on X because they posted something or they retweeted something or whatever. I think Elon Musk, took away the ability to see what people liked on X because people were getting canceled over liking a post from 12 years ago or whatever, which I just think is completely crazy. But, um, let's move into, like, international concerns. So I want to hear from you actually about international concerns. What international concerns do you have in regard to, I don't know, does do the US elections have a big impact on your daily life?
Probably not. I think it's more of a I think it's more of a show in terms of and here in other countries it's more like a piece of entertainment. So we can kind of stand on the sidelines, watch it and see what's happening and sort of either cheer or despair alongside. So I don't think in terms of everyday people lives here, it's probably not something they think too much about, or
Mhm.
unless their livelihoods connected to it, like they're some type of political commentator. But
Yeah.
I do think for most people, it's just something that you kind of are somewhat aware of. You can sort of
Mhm.
it's kind of like the World Cup. You know, you don't really follow it until maybe the final. You know, and
Yeah.
then you look at the final and you go, okay, that's what happened. And you move on with your life. And I think there's a similar approach to that.
Yeah. Now there is one thing that I really is more of a hope than anything, and I think that everybody listening to this podcast, if you have ever tried to get product into Europe, you will agree. It is so hard and frustrating to get products into the European Union. It a lot of people are just not even wanting to do it because
Mm.
it's a lot of extra work, it's a lot of extra steps, and it's very expensive and that kind of thing. Um, it's just so much work, regulation, and whatnot. I mean, you basically have to have a European person that is a citizen of the EU, um, responsible for, like, financially responsible for your product.
Which is
And
fine if you're a mega corporation. I think that's kind of one of the EU's tenets is to kind of have captured markets where they aren't really big on entrepreneurship. They don't really want new enterprises sprouting up. They're just more happy to have people
Right.
use the existing infrastructure. So that's why I think a lot of the legislation around the EU is kind of tailored more towards mega corporations. You can
Right.
have a full time, that person who like their life is dedicated on being EU compliant because that's all they do. But if you're a small operation, then that's not really feasible.
Right. And that is a major, major source of friction and frustration with small business owners, which make up half of the commerce, really half of the business in the US, or 60% in the US is small business owners. I think that, and I hope that Trump will make the EU stop it. That's one thing I hope. If Trump is going to stand up and say, make China, you know, uh, play ball again. Which, by the way, is kind of what I think is going to happen. I think that instead of tariffs, and I could be totally wrong, it's not what he said, but it's what happened last time. Instead of tariffs on goods, he actually removed the tariffs on goods as long as they played ball, right? As long as they did whatever, held up whatever their end of the bargain that they were negotiating for. So I hope the same happens with Europe, where it's like, let the small business owners put products into your country without, or into your region, without making it really hard. Um, I think that the U.S. has the we'll say, like, the economic weight to throw around, and I think that they will do those things. And I think that because Trump and even JD Vance, who is the vice president, they're both businessmen. I'm wondering if that's going to be an area of concern. And so it might just be, not, I don't know, it might not be, but I would hope that as publishers we would have some, you know, I don't know, relief from what I perceive as a very, very difficult thing to do, which is
Mm.
get product into the EU. I just want to sell stuff there, and happy to pay people to do it, like sales tax or whatever, but like, don't make it so hard. Anyway.
Well, I think as we move towards like a sort of there's this real push towards have like a global society where the US innovates, the EU regulates, and Asia replicates, and it's kind of like this self-sufficient, circle of this kind of like unity of this, trifacto world government. So, but it is interesting that that kind of is what happens. Is US does innovate and create technologies. I don't know any country really that produces new things. They will kind of just use what the US produces. I'm
Mhm.
sure there are outliers, of course. And the EU regulates, and then
Yeah.
a lot of people might copy their regulation. I know that's kind of happening in the US with food regulation. I think they want to kind of copy more of the European standard of food regulation,
Mhm.
and then Asia replicates and
Yeah.
masters the art of production.
Yep. Well, I think that Americans are much less healthy than Europeans, right? Like, as a general general observation, we're often the sickest, and we might live long, but I feel like, in Doctor Who there's this character that is like a lady that is a piece of skin that's like stretched out and just is a face. She's like a futuristic character that has this that's like aging forever. She's found ways to just keep herself alive and going, and beautiful or whatever, but she's just this giant piece of skin stretched out with like the face on it, and she can still talk and stuff. It's such a funny thing, but I think that, like, what quality of life is that, right? So anyway.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess finally we can get into the fourth element, or the final element is political turmoil, um, which I think we've kind of discussed. How does this impact the world? We've got, Europe and China are big ones. I think that politically it's easy to despair. I think that the first thing you've got to do as a business owner is just focus yourself on work. There, business owners, I think, remain business owners because they problem solve. So you try to get ahead of a problem and look for a solution. Just like a board game designer or a board game player, you're looking for. So there's a problem presented to you, a set of challenges that it's your job to solve. So the one thing that will hold you back beyond all others is if you freeze and don't do anything. If you fail to make moves, then you're going to you're gonna I mean, you're making a decision. And I
Mhm.
think that's how companies tend to get behind. Like you've got the Mythic Games of the world that are, you know, running a Kickstarter even though they haven't filled their last three. Oftentimes they may, and this is me speaking assumptively, but they may have had all the time they needed, but they weren't productive during that time. And so they fell behind. And eventually, when you fall behind far enough, you can't catch up anymore. And so, just my advice to you is ignore what you can't control and focus on what you can, what is
Mhm.
immediately around you, what your project that you're working on, that kind of thing. The product should launch when it's ready. It should not launch when the economic climate is perfect. It should not launch when, you know, people are most likely to have money to pay for it. The launch in March or October it seems to be the common advice. More products launch in March and October than any other months. I mean, Awaken Realms owned November and December, which is like the worst time to launch a
On paper.
gigantically
Yeah.
expensive, yeah, on paper. But you launch a product when it's ready. There are people that are going to buy it. One other thing I will say is that the United States accounts for the vast majority of money that is spent in board games.
Mhm.
And I would say, between 60 and 85% of any given project, whether it's raised on GameFound or Kickstarter, is going to be from the US. And there are probably outliers, of course, but so Kickstarter, GameFound, BackerKit, the big three right now, you're gonna see the vast majority of the money, the revenue coming in is from the US. So if the US becomes more stable and successful, the entire crowdfunding market will become more stable and successful. And so that's a huge point of contention that I would say um, the immediate future looks good for crowdfunding. I'm, I mean, it's there are, I definitely won't comment on like the status of everything, but in regard to business and running a crowdfunding organization, I think that the next several years are going to be very good. At least the next two. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see what happens to the market just as it progresses. But I'm pretty sure that in the short term, and this is actually quite a good thing for crowdfunding businesses.
I concur.
Most excellent, my dear Sean. Let's have Robot Richard send us out.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. For more resources, articles, and to listen to past podcasts, please visit us at crowdfundingnerds.com. And if you have a crowdfunding question, we also have a page on our site where you can send a message directly to us. Please visit crowdfundingnerds.com/question. And if your question is a great question, we may include it in a future podcast. Thank you all again for listening to this week's episode, and we'll see you next week. Stay nerdy.